So for a little opening exercise, when I say 10 commandments, what do you picture? You've got like a wind-blown Charlton Heston going on in your mind? How about like the ubiquitous steel-colored tablets that are always rounded at the top? Without fail, right? In courthouses, where I used to live, yard signs. I picture these billboards on Interstate 71 in Ohio, black, white writing, red flourishes that tell me about the 10 commandments. And then for an added bonus, you get one a couple miles later that says, hell is real. I don't know if it's theologically connected or not, but it does break up the trip, right? So maybe all you picture is the reading from Exodus, which maybe would be a gift to you, right? But my point is that the 10 Commandments have all this cultural overlay to them now. And in many ways, they've been used as like a cudgel in certain sectors of our society, which means I have kind of this knee-jerk reaction to the Exodus reading that's not all that helpful. Because it doesn't actually take into consideration anything about the actual context in which these were given. Because the actual context is like people are in a desert. And they haven't been there for all that long, but they've been there for enough time. And they're there because previously, months, before, they were all enslaved in Egypt for generations. And they called out to God to free them. And finally, God sent Moses as God's agent to deal with Pharaoh and to lead the people out. And they kind of get out of town, and then Pharaoh's army comes, and God does this miraculous parting of the waters, and everyone goes through. And then God leads them into the wilderness by fire at night, by cloud during the day, provides them food when they're hungry, water when they're thirsty. But the wilderness is an interesting place. And you begin, after a while, to ask yourself bunches of questions, but maybe they fall into kind of two categories. How are we supposed to be in relationship with this God who called us out of Egypt? The God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, our forebears. What is God asking of us now that we're free? And secondly, what are we as a people going to do about living together? There has been no legislative meeting. There's not a continental congress that's taken place in the wilderness, right? These are people without laws at the moment. They're people without a king. All they've got is like Moses and Aaron, and God is not setting up like a nepotistic oligarchy, right? And so they're left a little bit without parameters in their life together. And so it's God, not Moses, who gives them these 10 commandments in that context. They are in the wilderness. 10 teachings. Our Jewish brothers and sisters would call them the 10 words or the 10 teachings. 10 teachings, you can remember them easily. You have 10 fingers. Your children have, most likely, 10 fingers, right? You can. I'm not being facetious, but like, you can teach them to people. You can remember 10 things. You're not in a place to write all this down. It does eventually get codified in long and drawn out laws. For your edification, I commend to you the book of Leviticus, if you're really interested. That's where they all go. But for now, they're in the desert, and there are 10 key teachings that God gives. And I think thinking about them as 10 words or 10 teachings is a lot more helpful. Because that's the spirit in which God gives them. And the first word or the first teaching, God actually gives some context. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery. I.e., I am the Lord your God who heard your cries. I am the one who rescued you. I am the one who's the fire at night and the cloud during the day, the one who gives you food and sustains you out here in the dryness. I am the one who graciously called you. And if that is true, and if that is the relationship we'd agreed upon, then don't have any other ersatz gods. because that'll break relationship. And breaking that relationship will cause all kinds of consequences for the generations, because the choice one generation makes always impacts the next generation. And so God begins the whole thing by talking about how God will be with the people. And then, of course, there's this kind of hinge commandment, the one about Sabbath, right? If kind of the first ones are about God and people, then you have the Sabbath, which is this invitation for people to rest. It puts a parameter, a fence around the work week. Some wisdom there, right? Take a break, take a rest from the work. And resting, too, reminds us that while we rest, the world keeps spinning. God is still in control. And that we're human beings, we're worthy of rest. And then that reminds us that we're not God, that we're all made in the image of God, and that we all live together. And the first people we live with are in a family unit that is deserving of honor and respect, particularly back when this was written. And then if everyone bears the image of God, then we shouldn't murder one another. You shouldn't lie to people in court. You shouldn't break the vows that you make. Parameters. How do we want to be with God? And how do we want to be with one another? Society can't really flourish. Maybe this is a hot take, but society can't really flourish if you've not agreed on some basic ways to be together. Who wants to go around wondering if murder's okay? Who wants to take their case to court and think that perjury's just going to happen and no consequences are going to come of it? The people need something to boundary them. But I think, too, it's not just about that. It really is about trust and relationship, because these are not a set of just commandments. They're a set of teachings from God about how to be with God and how to thrive. And I'm really taken by what Walter Brueggemann, who's like the genius of the Old Testament, wrote. He says, the 10 teachings are not a set of rules, but a proclamation in God's own mouth of who God is and how God will be practiced by the people. But the 10 teachings are actually a gift of God's own self to the people, for how then they can live in ways that everyone flourishes. You came out of slavery in Egypt. Let's not repeat that model. Let's do this utterly differently. And I think, they come to us linearly, but I wonder, for me, it's not helpful, maybe for you, or it's just an act of projection, to think about them as concentric circles. That what the 10 teachings do is they place God at the very center of everything. And not just any God. The God who delivers. The God who graciously calls. The God who sustains. Love the Lord your God. And when you're loving God and you know that that God loves you back, it's the center and the focus of all of the rest that kind of ripple out from that, right? If that's true, why would you want another God? Why would you break relationship? Why would you take that God's name in vain? And why would you not take a rest? Because you're not God. It doesn't depend on you. You can take a breather. And then, of course, the image of God's on everybody, so ripple that out to your family and don't murder people. And see, the center of it all is God. And the teachings remind us that that's the core. And everything else ripples out from it. And I know I'm talking to a room full of people who confess Jesus as Christ, but these documents, they're part of our collective history. And I wonder if it's not helpful to think about them as a way to practice living God. Christians, sometimes we get our head all caught up in, do we believe the right thing? Orthodoxy. But there's a good point to be made that part of this whole thing is about orthopraxy, doing the right thing. Whether you feel like it or you don't, a kind of commitment to integrity. And I think that the 10 Commandments provide that to a degree, these 10 teachings. If God is at the center, and that's the core commitment to an integrity of our lives, then we're committed to how we want to treat one another. And that is how we end up practicing God in the world. We're not trying to earn something from God. We're not trying to be legalistic, moralistic, use these as a cudgel, but as teachings for how to walk in the world in a way that keeps God in the middle, keeps integrity of self, and practices God in how we live with other people. So whatever image we have of the Ten Commandments, helpful or not helpful, I wonder if they don't provide some helpful way of thinking about how we do want to act in the world, how we do want to be in relationship with the gracious God, how we do want everybody to thrive. And maybe then the 10 teachings are really helpful, not just for those of us in this generation who practice it, but for generations to come, now and forever.